to another episode of What Works, a series of conversations with people who have experience and knowledge about how to handle life's biggest challenges. So today I have a very special guest. I have a Scandinavian, Jaakko Seikkula is here. So I will let him have a chance to introduce himself. Maybe some of you have heard him before, maybe don't. So Jaakko, how would you describe yourself for a stranger? Who are you?
Well, you already said my name, Jaakko Seikkula. I've been working I was educated as a clinical psychologist, and in a way I have two careers. The first career was working as a clinical psychologist in a psychiatric context in Finnish Lapland, main part of it, in which also the innovation we created, which has become the most important issue in my professional life. And step by step I moved to work in the university. So I've been working as a professor in psychotherapy in the University of Jyväskylä in Finland for some 20 years, and now retired from that position 3 years ago. But unfortunately I was invited to work as a professor again. So I started again last year, September, in the University of Agder in Norway. So that's my context where I work. But really, perhaps I would say myself being a scientist in this respect.
Okay. How come you used the word unfortunately?
Well, being retired 3 years and then coming back to work, it's a bit, I've been thinking it was a losing the reality testing in one way. But actually I was retired from the university, and I retired myself because there is such a, perhaps we will talk later about it, such a big request in the world of having support of applying these open dialogue ideas, and I decided that I will focus on that issue, that we create a global network by organizing training, and that's what I've been doing 3 years as being retired.
I would love to hear more about open dialogue, and you will get a chance to say that. But I was just curious about if somebody becomes really interested in more conversations with you. Is that possible, or is that possible?
Definitely, yes, please.
So remind me to ask you before we leave how they will do if they want to have a connection with you. So you have a long career. I know you have worked in different areas, but open dialogue seems to be a good headline to a lot of things you have inspired people to. So I would like to steal a question from you and your friend Tom Erik Arnskild. And that is when we play with time, we can see things we don't see in other ways. So I would just like to ask you, and you probably already know what I'm going to ask. If this conversation seems open, how will we know it?
If this conversation will be open.
Yes, this right now. How would you know?
Well, we know it in a way that we do not prepare it in advance. And step by step we put ourselves in a position in which we follow the conversation and no longer lead the conversation. So it's the conversation that leads us.
Okay, so let's do that. See how it goes.
Let's do it.
What would be a good first step, do you think, Jaakko?
Well, it's perhaps more up to you to think what were the thoughts in your mind, and perhaps also to think that when you have put an energy to make this conversation, what would be fruitful for you?
I love the way, because I have prepared just 3 questions. So I would love to be able to have a chance to say them. And one of them is from a friend. It's about biofeedback, but we'll come to that. I was just wondering if you could say something. How did you end up doing this from the beginning? Is this something, do your parents, did they also work with this? And how come you ended up doing this work?
Well, now in trance, actually, I realized that already while studying psychology, my main interest started to be focused on the most difficult mental health problems. So I did my thesis about what are the risk factors of mental problems in adult life, and when started to work, my very first places to work were a psychiatric polyclinic, and step by step moved to northern Finland to Tornio, in which I started to work in a psychiatric hospital, and working there, psychotic problems and meeting with people who had a long time psychotic problem became my key interest, and that really has been the very fascinating part of my background. I was very enthusiastic with this sounds a bit strange to say, but I was very enthusiastic to meet with people who have psychotic problems, and very enthusiastic to meet with families in which there are psychotic people, and this has not changed for 40 years. But when we please.
Why? Sorry if I interrupt you. I'm just interested. Have you figured out where that curiosity came from?
That's also, I've been thinking that a lot, of course, because I know that that many therapists, many people who have done a very important work, for instance, Johan Kuhlberg in Sweden, I was very fascinated. We were very good friends also one time when still Johan was active, and he openly describes his dissatisfaction of the treatment that his brother got in psychiatry.
He wrote a book about that.
Yeah, and I don't have that kind of family history. In my family, close family, I do not have any having mental illnesses in that way. So I don't have that kind of interest. But perhaps one of the responses is that meeting with people with psychotic problems is always impossible to predict what will happen. It's always a unique meeting.
Yeah. It's always a meeting, yeah.
Yeah, and also thinking about the question what works, you never know. Even if you have some models, they do not help you anyway. You need to be in this situation to
exactly. I was doing an interview with Scott Miller that I think you know who he is, and he really emphasizes that don't get blind and think that the model is going to do the work. You are going to do the work. So so you have this curiosity, but how did you manage to keep being curious for so long? A lot of people would maybe have changed direction, and you probably have in some way, but it seems like you've been really stubborn and consistent in doing this work with psychotic people or psychotic communities, or why not even the whole world is sometimes a bit psychotic.
Yeah.
How did you manage to keep on going?
I think that I was very fortunate moving to northern Finland in Tornio, in which we became a team who was very eager to have a new kind of treatment for the most severe problems. We had an idea that we want to have a family-centered psychiatry. And first we tried to apply systemic family therapy. I was also interested to individual psychotherapy in psychodynamic frame. Step by step realizing that this does not work. And then
how did you realize that? Is this something
we realized that two things. First of all, we realized we were very occupied of the idea that they seem to be so different, working with individually and working with family. They seem to be two different frames or paradigms on the whole, even if we were the same workers. Same clinicians in that frame. And secondly, we realized that only few families could participate in family therapy programs when we planned the treatment. And the big change happened in 1984 when we heard that in Turku in Finland they had created this innovation of open, as they called, open therapy meetings.
Open therapy.
And the idea was that give up planning the treatment and give up thinking that you need to have a family therapy for the families. They need to have some indication to become, but start automatically invite always the families, and also change the practice that stop to speak about your patient's among the professionals, and only speak of them while they are present. And I think that this really opened a frame into a new world that has really been the motivating factor for the years.
So I want to just slow it down a little, because that is such a big thing you're saying. In my world, that's a big thing, to stop planning therapy and changing it around. So I was wondering, the professionals had to do a lot of different ways of changing their habits, I guess.
Yes.
How did you manage to go from thinking that you are going to plan out a good, helpful therapy to just, I mean, it sounds like music to me, but it's also a lot of improvisation.
Yes,
How
and
did
of
you
course,
manage to change the point of view in not only you, but the whole community?
yeah, we had some very rigid rules of thumb to ourselves how to do it. We repeated to ourselves, you are not allowed to speak of the patient if she is not present. You are not allowed to make any decision concerning the family if the family is not present or at least invited to the meeting. And you are not allowed to, or you are allowed to speak confidentially with the patient, meaning individual meetings, only if you have a good reason for that. So we wanted to change everything, that work as team and work open, and perhaps I was the most rigid one with my colleagues to repeat this, that no, we have to follow this idea.
So were you kind of, were you in charge, or were you one of the team? Or when you're saying you're the rigid one, how come you were that one?
Well, being a psychologist in a psychiatric ward gives you some freedom that, for instance, the nurses in the ward do not have, because they need to be so much involved in the meeting. And also in respect of psychiatrists, they have their tasks and so on, so that being psychologist, you may have a bit more open perspective to these issues. And
I thought you were going to say power, but you said freedom. That's fun.
Yeah. That's
So
what we have been accused, that the psychologist had the power in the psychiatric hospital in Tornio. That was an accusation of some psychiatrists towards my colleagues, psychiatrists, and they did not see it that way. They didn't understand at all the situation like that.
Okay, so I guess it was like a new world was opening up for you, both the professional and the clients. What
Yes.
was the, how could you see that it was working? What would you say was the key in realizing this is the way to go? Because probably it didn't just go perfect from day one. You had to struggle a bit. Or
yeah, that was a new world. That was I can say now a revolution. It happened 27th of August 1984.
Wow,
that was
what happened that day?
That was the day. Well, we had a 1 week training. We had that time that we call schizophrenia summer schools, and in that summer school 1 week, we heard about the team in Turku about this practice, and we were so fascinated that the doctor in charge, his name is Jyrki Keränen, decided that from now on we follow this idea. No longer have meetings to plan the treatment without the clients, and always invite the family. And it really happened. So that on Monday, that was 27th of August 94.
Wow. That's so exciting that you can actually nail the date it happened.
Yes. It's funny thing, because people many times ask, how long time did it take to take a change? 1 day. It took 1 day.
1 day. That's amazing. Well, there's a lot of effort before that day, of course, but how did you see, what did the clients say that was different when you changed?
Yeah, they realized it, and actually we were very fortunate, because the very first experiences, I remember still the 2 first experiences. Monday we had a meeting with one young man, and Wednesday we already had a meeting with one lady who was hospitalized with her family, and both meetings were very, very fascinating and good results. But what happened was that step by step we started also to have very confusing experiences that we did not at all understand what is happening here.
Could you give an example of that confusion?
Well, I think that the I don't know what's the word, the divided the
Separation.
the definitor of this was that we were in two frame at the same time, because we were so used to think that we need to have a plan, we need to have our intervention to make change in the family or affect the symptoms. But this new frame, open frame, was a different paradigm already, and it became a clash between those. We repeated our decisions. You need to do this. You need to follow our prescriptions. But people no longer follow, because the families had a lot to say. How do they want that their family members are treated? And many repeatedly in this kind of situation, what happened was that the change happened when we changed ourselves. For instance, in some situation, we could give up our aims, and thereafter a big change started to happen in our relationships and step by step also in his or her condition.
So if we're taking the spotlight from the clients and to the professionals, you and your friends and colleagues, it wasn't just a one day thing and then everything works. You had to struggle to change habits and find new principles. And it also sounds like really tough work being in relationship within the professional network, because the habits is hard to change, I guess. So what was the biggest challenge before it got into a kind of more accessible and easy way of, not easy, but when you start to find the rhythm together, what was the biggest challenge for the professionals, do you think?
I think that you already said it. The biggest, this is also a question, that what was the biggest resistance in the new practice? And the answer is clear. It was ourselves. It's myself who has the biggest resistance to the new practice. We start to create a kind of excuses. Of course, we cannot do that because. Of course, we cannot do that because. And step realizing that there are no limits. We have a lot of possibilities, and because we really had created a new kind of connection, new kind of community with our clients, in which there were available much more resources than we realized before.
Yeah, I'm thinking if I would love to have been with that, but it would have been confusing, I guess, because how do you plan when people go to work and go home if you're not even? One of the things I use when I work, I find that people think that a conversation is about 40 minutes to an hour, but a conversation can be for years or a second. So, I mean, just that little detail, how long is a meeting, that you can argue yourself blue in the face with that. So how did you manage to not just lose it and become like consultants doing their own thing? And how did you manage to stay together all this time?
Well, many things started to happen after that occasion. We realized that, for instance, the day schedules in the hospital ward were no longer possible to follow, and actually we disclosed every program. There were in our ward there were no programs anymore. We only organized these meetings with, for instance, one patient could be every day in our short meeting, so that if we thought that possible. But in addition, of course, we all know that we have different occupations and we need to adjust for the time of the meeting in the realist time frame that people have. But actually, I think that your point was very good, that about the conversation, because we are only a part of the conversation. If we have a good dialogue, we can be pretty sure that the dialogue will continue among the family.
Yes.
After the meeting, as it continue in my mind also. So meeting with us are only part of the ongoing dialogue, and of course we hope that they can be meetings in which they can have new ideas to go on with their own dialogues.
I think that's beautiful. That's we're only part of a lot of dialogues at the same time, so it depends on on things like politics, financials, power, curiosity. So what was your biggest challenge, Jaakko? Because you were trying to help this to happen. If you, I probably you will be thinking about it in a different way now when you're looking back at it. But when you're sitting here with me, what do you remember was the biggest challenge for you in that?
I was one of the challenges. One of a surprise was me that I was fascinated, and some of us also were very fascinated of this openness, so that we can share openly everything. But I was surprised, for instance, that some of the nursing staff were not at all so happy about the idea that they were invited to the meetings. And for instance, I could have a question to her, how do you think about it? And she was scared to death. How can I answer to that? Because they were so, as we all, so much taught to think and fast and be neutral and be careful of your words and everything. And now all change. So dealing with that kind of resistance was one of the ideas that we were dealing.
That's like when you're in therapy as a professional talking with someone and you ask them, what do you think is going to help you? And you get the response, well, isn't that your job? And there's
something
no
like that. Yeah. And then if someone said something, I asked her, could you say some more about it? And she was furious after the meeting, saying that, why didn't you rely on my response? Why did you ask more about it? So that was a kind of accusation for her that your response is wrong and you need to say something else that you said. And of course, that was a point of time in which we did not know so much or nothing about the dialogue in itself, and step by step started to realize that this really is a new frame to all of us.
So when you were creating this new frame and didn't have all the cards in your hand, where did you go for inspiration?
We had a two conclusion quite early. We realized that the education that the staff has is not enough, the basic education, and we made a decision that in our system we try to organize possibility for 3 years psychotherapy training for every clinicians, nurses, doctors, psychologists, social workers, and we started to organize that actually already 86 and 89 as a part of the own work of the hospital. And the second conclusion was that we need to evaluate our own practice. We need to start to make research to understand what is this all about, because there were no textbooks or writings or results of these issues. And I think that these two issues has become a kind of safeguard for myself to
keep
be
going
online. Yeah, keep going online. Yeah.
Did you have any external inspiration? Did you go and see others people or read books, or how did you get oxygen into the?
Yeah. We started to made a search about this issue, how to understand. For instance, I was very keen to find out in philosophy about the importance of language, because we all realized very early that language is a very essential. And while working that, I was dissatisfied. I did not find that much philosophical writings about the issue that would be valid to us. But then occasionally I was involved in one conversation in which one person described, we had been studying at the 70s in the same university, and she said that do you remember that when we were studying in the University of Jyväskylä, there were this professor in Russian language, his name is Erkki Peuranen, who was speaking about this Mihail Bachtin and his ideas. And when she listened to me, she was not working in psychiatry. Listen to me, she said that I start to think about the same kind of phenomenon that this Peuranen is describing in Bachtin writings about literature. And then immediately I took one paper it was a radical cultural paper in which Peuranen wrote about this Bahtin, and I was shocked. While reading the text, he was describing a literature researcher and philosopher, and he was prescribing our practice.
And didn't he has dialogue as one of the titles? He was really into going from monologue into dialogue, and yes, like a scientist trying to figure out how does that work.
Yes, and dialogue, and as he called polyphony, so that dialogue in polyphony, in which there are many participants, as it was in our meetings, and while describing the work of Fyodor Dostoevsky, Bahtin had realized that the author loses the control of his characters, and the only possibility for the author is to be in dialogue with his character to have the story go on. And this was exactly what we had been living through for years at that point.
Could you repeat that, please? I didn't get the last when you quoted. What was it you said about Bakhtin's language? Could you say it one more time?
Yeah, he made one of his main part of his work was making research of Fyodor Dostoevsky's novels. And he found out that it's a very special way, because in Dostoevsky's novels there are never one hero and other completing the story of the hero, but there are as many heroes as are people speaking. Everyone creating their own truth, and no one can deny his or her truth, and therefore the only possibility is to be all the time ongoing dialogue. If you ever have read Dostoevsky's novel, this is so easily seen that the people are all the time in dialogue with each other. And Bahtin said that this creates a situation in which these characters start to know more of their lives as the author, as Dostoevsky. So for Dostoevsky, the only way to go on is to be in dialogue with his characters.
So that there's another term that I like, that is stream of consciousness, where it comes from different voices and shows up like a symphony. So if I never heard about Dostoevsky or Bakhtin or anyone, and I was to ask, and I'm gonna ask you now, what do you know if there's a difference between Swedish way of doing meetings in your country, Finland, and have you any clue about America, just by how the language shapes the meetings? Do you have any knowledge about that?
Actually, it was a surprise. I'm very fortunate because I really participate in the meetings in all over the world. And I was so keen to think about these cultural specialities. And of course, it's very important to have a respect of the cultural differences. But the meetings can be very same in whichever culture, which actually for me says that the dialogue is general. Dialogue, the idea of dialogue is a very basic idea of human life in whatever culture you are living. In
wherever you go on the planet, you will see people sitting in circles trying to figure out life's problems.
And then they meet with the same kind of emotional reactions. For instance, once I was in a meeting in Shanghai in China. There was a father with his psychotic son, and the son was also psychotic in the meeting, and then we had a conversation. And there are quite strict rules in this context, cultural context, to how do you show your emotions. And what happened in our dialogue was that when I had a conversation with the staff, there was a doctor, a nurse, and while speaking, all of a sudden the nurse said that last week I had a very good conversation with this young man. And when she said it, I realized that she started to have tears in her eyes. And then we had a bit more conversation and she started to cry. That was a very confusing experience for the audience. I started to cry. We started to cry. And step by step, after this, actually it was the doctor who said that I don't know if it is allowed to show our emotion openly in the meeting with us. after this conversation, it was relieving in many ways. I started to discuss with the father. He had been very closed in the meeting, and only had been responded by one word. And then I don't remember. I asked something about the situation of his son, and he took a breath. Then he moved his face into the floor and started to cry heavily. And I think that this is one of the cultural reactions, so that you do not show it openly, but you have your face towards the floor.
Wow.
But when having this for a time, for me, by the way, it's very important that when someone become emotional, please let it happen. Do not make any questions or comments at that point. It's so important that she can be in her emotions.
Vulnerable place to be in. Yes.
Yeah. And then Walter said that this is so good. This is the first time I cry for this, and so on. So that this kind of things happens in the meeting in China or Finland or Sweden or wherever.
So how come we're so obsessed by dividing these kind of practices into schools that start to compete with each other from different therapy models and everything? Have you ever thought about that? You've been around and working with different people from different cultural contexts, different therapeutic language. How come we still keep dividing what we do into little concepts and fighting over the concepts instead of looking at how does it fit together in the general, wherever you are on the planet?
I think that that's a very good outcome of the psychotherapy research, contemporary psychotherapy research, that has shifted the focus to look at how do we create the relationships, and no longer so much about this specific intervention, but at the same time accepting the idea that there are many ways to be in the relationships. And it may be that they are somewhere related with the specific context, and definitely they are related with the creator of the of the ideas. And there are many ways you can, someone has said that there may be 400 different ways in psychotherapy, so you really can choose the way that you think that fits most to you, but all need to be dialogic to work.
So the different ways up the same mountain, but you have to have dialogue on the way, whatever road you go on. So
No, the dialogical approach is in extreme in this end, because in our approach the dialogue becomes a value by itself, so that it's no longer a tool or some threshold to some action, but it is the action itself. We do not aim by dialogue to have something, but we aim to have dialogue. That's it.
Wow, that's it. Feels like we could stop talking and just enjoy what you said now. That was really, because it's hard to put into language this. You're very good at it. I'm not at all good. I'm not used to speaking in this language even. So, but how do we find ways to point to reality without losing ourselves looking at the finger? That's a classic mistake we can do. So would it be possible? I know it's not a method, but it's a way or an approach, this thing you call open dialogue. Could you say something more? What is it today? It's been evolving, I understand, but how do you understand open dialogue today? What if you met a stranger on the street, how would you describe it?
Open dialogue is one way to put in practice the idea of dialogue, the idea that it has developed in the most doing a kind of approaches is in the most serious crises, in psychotic crisis, but it's not only for psychotic crisis, in whatever difficult crisis, but in general it includes two important issues. The first one is how do we organize ourselves to make possible the most optimal dialogues in crisis, in whatever crisis. And of course, secondly, how do we involve in the dialogues with our clients and with my colleagues? And
Organizing and involving.
Yes.
And is that like, do you have to meet a specific, how do I get access to people that work, like say if I'm a patient and I'm schizophrenic or whatever they call me, how would I go about to get that kind of help? Is it possible for anyone, or is it just a selected few? How is this in the everyday life of people helping?
Yeah, in the context in which this practice has been developed, the idea has become to introduce it for everyone in any kind of situation. For instance, in Lapland, in Finland, in some other places also nowadays. And usually what happens is that the system organized teams, and these teams work most often in a crisis situation so that they are immediately available and they can come at your home and they can meet with you, and if you are not willing to meet with them, they probably will stay there and meet with your spouse or with your mother and father and try to motivate you also to be in the meetings, but you are allowed to elect if you want to participate or not.
I will let you continue. I just want to throw in that for a couple of years ago, I heard you say something about that, and it stuck in my memory that the one who answers the phone will keep the contact until the meeting is realized, and it was about like it wouldn't take more than 24 hours or something like that.
Yes. The
That's
idea is to have the
amazing.
first meeting in the first day. Yes.
Mm.
It's very important in a crisis, because in crisis people are in their emotional turmoil, and this emotional turmoil is a very powerful condition, because in that situation you do not have so much concrete explicit explanations, and you have a much more implicit emotional experiences, and through that you are open someone says the window is open to start to big issues that never before were possible to speak about. That is so important to meet immediately. If you meet 2-3 days after, people already have started to create some strategy to survive, and many windows have been closed.
Yes,
And they no longer speak about the things.
Isn't it also so that the people around them start to create a story about what has happened that then will be a part of the problem?
Exactly. Yes.
So,
Both the one who is the key person, but also those closest to them.
so when we're talking now, let's be a bit careful and clear about. It sounds like we're talking about other people, the psychotics or the people in another culture, but do you make any difference? How do you know when you have to schedule a meeting within 24 hours or the next week? How do you know which one are the ones you need to be fast with?
The people who make contact, they know.
They
If
know.
we really created this rule that whoever answered the phone is responsible to organize the first meeting. So, for instance, my situation, I was working as a psychologist in the ward for chronified people who had been there for a long time. So I was not involved in crisis intervention, but some mother had found my name and made a call to me, so I knew that I'm responsible for organizing the meeting and organize the team for the meeting. But then when the mother is describing, and I said that could it be okay that we come to you tomorrow morning, and I perhaps invite the people from our clinic if there are some drug abuse problems, and the mother said no, we are not in that big hurry. Then we know, okay, we have time to wait. But this is the process in which it's defined if there is a need to meet immediately or not. I don't think that we professional manage to find the definition what is crisis and what is not crisis.
Because a lot of people might say that, well, I hear voices in my head all day. Maybe if someone is listening to this and not watching and they have headphones on, they will hear Jaakko's röst, Johnny's röst, and maybe their own thoughts in a mix. And if you ask somebody on the street, do you hear voices in your head? Probably everybody hear voices sometimes, but sometimes it gets way out of hand, and it gets the thing that happens to be very unfamiliar to the other people. So if we're talking about the really what you call psychotic or psychotic episodes, how did you how did you measure the results? How did you know that it was working? How do you know what works?
Well, that was one of the main questions. We also realized that we need to follow, because this is so new practice, if this is really working, and also to find out the problematic situation. And that's why we started to make research. First research we started to plan 1987, and it's going on. The new people who there has been a generation shift, but they still are all the time making research. And in these studies we have a lot of confirmation that this really is working, and also we have found problems in which need to be corrected to make it better.
I listened to you and you said something that I don't know if my memory serves me right, but I think it was about a community in Finland where you work. This might have been your colleague Tom Erik Arnskild who said, but the diagnosis schizophrenia almost disappeared.
Yes, that's one of the conclusion of the studies that we have done. It's really resisted in studies. In one of the study we realized that in the middle of 80s it was a very high incidence of schizophrenia, one of the highest I know in the world. And of course Lapland in Finland, also the Swedish side of the Tornedal River, it's a very high incidence of many diseases, including schizophrenia. And then when we followed from 33 to per 100,000 inhabitants, it had declined to 7 until 95, and 10 years after 2005 it was 2.
Oh, wow.
Or per 100,000 inhabitants. So that it's 90%. The incidence of schizophrenia has declined 90%.
So I know there's a lot of science you can talk about to trying to figure this out, but is there some way to easily say what was the key element that changed? What if all the world would do that? Would schizophrenia only be a memory? Or what how do you describe that to somebody? What is it that you did and with the clients that was the amazing, not amazing, that's too much, but what was the helpful key factor, do you think?
I think 3 things. First of all, that we meet immediately, which means that people are short the time psychotic before they make contact, and it's easier to recover. Secondly, we really want to work together with the family and some other part of the social network, so we all the time have the support system involved, and people also themselves get help. And the third point is the dialogue, that in the meetings you can have a feeling that you are respected and listened to, that people do not have, unfortunately, in the society on the whole, and in the daily practice that they meet in treatment as usual setting.
Do you have any experience if we move our eye from psychotic or schizophrenic or whatever you call it into more regular family troubles, if there's anything like that, high conflict divorces or grief? Did you have you any experience of open dialogue or meetings and what can you say about that?
Yeah, it's the very same process. We do not have that much research. We have some research about very depressed people being involved, but not systematic research to have some statistic about. But it's the very same issue. So that in the meetings or meeting the people on the whole, there are no difference. If the problem is psychotic problems or big anxiety or having stopped eating or having suicidal thoughts, it's really to come together and try to have a place for everyone to be listened to.
It feels like, for me, have some experience of networks meeting and doing work with couple and families extended. It seems like it sounds so obvious we should meet together to discuss what to do, but that's almost an alternate way of doing today. Most people seem to, or most organizations seem to go straight to the individual and trying to fix that fast.
Yes.
So how do you look at the future, Jaakko? Do you think open dialogue will be something that will spread more and more, or do you think the reductional point of view will become bigger and bigger? Maybe there's not either or, but what's your response?
It really has started to happen, so that, as I said, that was one reason for my a bit early retirement, to start to make support of the systems. And since 2015 there has been an exponential growth of open dialogue practice in the world. Unfortunately not in Sweden, but all the other countries. So that's
so it's just here. We're the bad sheep.
Well,
how do you understand that? What's about Sweden? What is it about Sweden that seems, maybe it's just your point of view, maybe there are many answers to this question, but you know Sweden well. What if you feel able to talk about that? Maybe some Swedes will listen to this, but what's wrong with Sweden?
I don't want to hurt any feelings, but there were a lot of good practices all over the Sweden, and they, in the beginning we were very much connected in Falun, Borlänge, Skellefteå, in what's the city south of Sweden?
South of
only 60 kilometers south of Stockholm. No, south of Stockholm.
Botkyrka was one of the network where everything started, and we had lots of people. Gävle, Västerås. But what's the problem with Swedes?
I don't. One of the challenging issue is that there is a tendency among those people who work in the cognitive behavioral therapy in Sweden, more than in other countries, to have a control of other practices. And I don't like that. So that many people in cognitive behavioral therapy have applied good models, but please do not try to have control of the other people working, so that you can really make an integration of the different practices.
So complement each other with different methods, not compete. I understand. So just let me check the clock. Time flies away. Oh, it's almost an hour has almost passed, and it feels like we just started. Let me just stop for a second. I have this friend, Mai Mosley, who you maybe have met. I think you two met some time ago. She wanted me to ask you a question, so I have to promise and do what I promised. So she wanted me to ask you about biofeedback. Now that sounds like something in a science fiction movie, but she seems to think that you know something about that fits this context.
I don't know if she or he, her.
It's a she. She's from Singapore, Mai Mosley.
Okay. Yeah. It may be that her interest is part of the last study project that we have had. We call it Relational Mind, in which we are looking how do we synchronize with our bodies in dialogues, and we also do the measurement of the reaction of autonomic nervous system. And in our research we have it's still going on a bit, that we have an interest to really look how do we speak with each other with our body besides the language, and synchronize that part. But in very precise way, that's not biofeedback. Even if you in biofeedback they use same kind of data, for instance looking at the autonomic nervous system reactions. But in our practice, we really want to look at this embodiment in dialogues. How do we look at it?
How do you look at it? I remember now, when you were in Malmö in a conference, I think you said you were measuring the fingertips on the both people talking.
Yes, yeah.
What's that about? Is that about this kind of understanding?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for me, it's so important that we do not make measurement of the clients. We do measurement of the clients and the therapist. And then idea is to look how do they fit together and what are the specific ingredients. And there is a lot of very interesting information that has come out of this.
That sounds like another hour of talk.
Yes.
But, maybe we can meet another time and we will talk more about that. I'm thinking to slow down and just maybe check with you if there's something you would say that hasn't been said about the practice you have been doing and the research you have been doing. We talk a little bit about the future, not so much about what you're doing right now, but maybe you. So I will leave it to you. Is there something you want to share with the viewers or listeners before we start to close?
Well, that's definitely one part of this to this embodiment in dialogue. It really has become a big issue in the latest part of my research also and in my career. And I think that it's a very new area, but it's in line with the idea that in dialogue, it's the talking, the words are only very minor part and
Yes.
much more what is happening. For instance, when we speak here, we move a lot, we make a movements in our heads, and the tonation of our language is changing all the time. And this is a synchronization that we happen. And I think that in this kind of synchronization, new resources are created to learn more of my misery. And so,
could you say that once more? Just as, what did you say?
About that, that this is a part of the synchronization, that the synchronization of movement of voices, also autonomic nervous system, and in this kind of process, we create a kind of new resources for people to learn new things of their misery.
I'm getting excited now to ask questions about that, but I will respect the time frame that is about an hour now. If it's okay with you, maybe we could do another talk in the future. So let's just check with if the listener want to talk with you or get in contact with people that work like you. What do they do? How can you find you or your?
Well, you can find my email on internet, for instance, and in the university I've been working, and you can write to me.
So can I use the email we had in the YouTube clip?
Please do not do that in YouTube clip.
Okay.
Because I have too much of them, so that but people can search by themselves.
Yeah.
And I have emails every day from mostly from people who have been mistreated in the psychiatric system, and I really want to help.
Yes.
And
people will find you if they want to.
Yes.
So I'm so grateful that you did this, Jaakko. It's been amazing to talk with you, and maybe we'll talk some more. But now I want to tell you to have a nice weekend, and thank you for doing this. And for the listeners, if you like what you hear, you can subscribe to this non-profit conversations on YouTube. Please do if you want. Thank you, Jaakko. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you for you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.